Indiana travels to South Bend, Indiana. The game is going to be played 8 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday night. This will be on ABC. Notre Dame currently about a 7.5-point favorite. The total hovers around 51. Who would have thunk it? The first ever college football playoff game is going to be played between two schools that are separated by about 200 miles. So in a game between same state opponents, this is also the first time that Notre Dame has played a game at Notre Dame Stadium on a Friday night. These two teams have been super dominant all season long. Now, Notre Dame and Indiana, they have received a little bit of criticism about the level of competition that they've played, but who cares? They're in the field, and what they have done, even though while their strength of schedule numbers maybe not up to snuff of typical college football playoff contenders, look at the level of dominance. Points per game differential. Indiana has beaten teams by an average of 28.7 points. Notre Dame has beaten teams by an average of 26.3 points. That ranks first and second in the FBS in points per game differential. So while they might not have played great teams, they've dominated everyone they've played for the most part, with the exception of Indiana against Ohio State and Notre Dame against NIU. Let's dive into the questions that will determine the outcome, shall we? Question number 1, how did Indiana get here? We'll start with that one, right? Because I do think it's important to tell Indiana's story when evaluating this matchup and why they're here and how they got here and all these other things. Because most people would think, hang on a second, Indiana, how the heck are they a team that finished 4th in the Big Ten in the college football playoff? Well, few different reasons, right? They completely overhauled their roster. This is year number 1 under new head coach Curt Cignetti. They brought in 30 transfers this offseason. That was the most in the Big Ten. And they also, within that 30 transfers, they brought in 13 from James Madison. Now, those James Madison transfers account for 29% of the team's snaps this season. So Curt Cignetti clearly has a system. He wanted to bring guys that were super familiar with the system. So therefore, brings those guys in. They count for nearly a third of the team's snap production. Overall, 77% of the Hoosiers' total starts this year have come from players that have transferred at some point in their career. That's the most in the Big Ten. That's the 6th most in the FBS. And part of the reason why Indiana's here is they didn't really play against top-tier competition. They took players that maybe don't always look the part from a height, weight, size, speed combination. They just took good football players from JMU, they plugged them into the system, and they beat teams that might not have championship caliber players. They went 1-1 against teams that finished with a winning record this season. Indiana faced 2 teams that ranked in the top 15 total defense. That would be Ohio State and Michigan. Those are the only 2 games this season where the Hoosiers were held under 300 yards of offense and they were held under 30 points. So a little bit beneficial, a little bit because the schedule wasn't where it needed to be, that familiarity and that talent gap that might have existed against the top tier competition, it never showcased itself because it never really was forced to showcase itself. That's question number 1. Question number 2, will Notre Dame be able to run the football? Do we really need to ask many questions beyond this one? I mean, this is kind of what's going to determine the game. I mean, if you are unfamiliar with Indiana and you're unfamiliar with Notre Dame, it's going to come down to whether or not Indiana's offensive line or Notre Dame's offensive line can move Indiana's defensive line off the ball. This is good versus good, elite part of the team against elite part of the team. And I think when you take good versus good matchups, whoever wins that good versus good matchup, they're going to be the ones that are likely victorious in the game. Fighting Irish ranked 3rd in yards per carry this season. That's only behind New Mexico and Boise State. Indiana is 2nd in opponents' yards per carry, behind Ole Miss. But part of the reason why Ole Miss is sitting there at the top is because of the amount of sacks that Ole Miss has generated this year. But if you look at it just purely based on designed run plays, nobody has played the run better than Indiana in college football this season. You look at the Fighting Irish, their 1-2 punch at running back, incredible. If you're unfamiliar with Jadarian Price or Jeremiah Love, you're going to love what you see. They each rank in the top 10 nationally in yards per rush after contact, and what they do when they get in the red zone and just pounding the football away. Notre Dame is one of 5 schools to record at least 40 rushing touchdowns this season. Can you name the other 4? Army, probably got that one right. Boise State, Ashton Jeanty, makes sense. Alabama makes sense, especially with Jalen Milroe accounting for as many rushing touchdowns as he has. Can you get the last one? Jacksonville State. Rich Rod, who's now back at West Virginia, loves to pound the rock. So we know that Notre Dame's going to be a team that's very committed to it, not just with Price and Love, but also with Riley Leonard, who's excellent with his legs, going to probably get you about 9 or 10, maybe 11 carries a game. They're in a design quarterback situation. Indiana, they're allowing just 70.8 rushing yards a game this year. So this is a group that is really stout against the run. They have good personnel along the front, and it's going to be hard for Notre Dame's offensive line to move these guys off the football. Question number 3, can Indiana win in the trenches offensively? So Indiana's offensive line against Notre Dame's defensive line. Indiana's done a pretty good job as far as pressure allowed. They do a decent job in pass protection. They give up pressure on about 24% of their dropbacks. That's bottom 5 in the FBS. So it's not often that Curtis Rourke, their starting quarterback, is under pressure. That's if you look at the entire season. But if you look at it situationally, the first 9 games were really, really good. But you know the difference between the first 9 games and the last 3? They had their starting left guard, Drew Evans, who was out for the year now after he got injured there in the 9th game of the season. And the last 3 games without them hasn't been quite as good. They've taken a pretty significant step back. And 2 of the last 3 teams that they played registered double-digit pressures. Those came against Ohio State and Michigan. Those were by far their 2 worst offensive performances on the season, really because they didn't do a very good job up front. Let's just call it what it was. Against Ohio State, Indiana allowed pressure on nearly half of their dropbacks. I told you a moment ago, season-long pressure rate is about 24%. Well, against Ohio State, it was 48%. And against Ohio State and Michigan, they had 9 sacks. Against everybody else, 9 sacks in 10 games. 9 against Ohio State and Michigan, 9 in the other 10 games combined. And Notre Dame's one of the best in the country as far as pressuring the opposing quarterback. 47% of their opposing quarterback's dropbacks came under pressure. That's the 2nd highest rate in the FBS behind LSU. So can Indiana hold up along the offensive line against what I think is an excellent Notre Dame defensive front? Question number 4, can Notre Dame force some mistakes? Now, a big reason why the game for Indiana against Ohio State got sideways is because Indiana made a bunch of mistakes in that performance. They fumbled inside their own 20 on a sack fumble. They muffed a punt snap. They allowed a punt return. And Indiana all year has been very clean when it comes to turnovers. They've been smart. They have a veteran quarterback in Curtis Rourke. They have just 8 turnovers this season. That's the 2nd fewest in the FBS behind Vanderbilt. 4 of those 8 turnovers came against Maryland. So 1 game, 4 turnovers. The other 11, just 4 turnovers. So that they did come in bunches once this year. But this is a Notre Dame defense that excels in taking the football away. They've forced 28 this year. That's number 1 in the sport, tied with Texas. That includes 5 pick sixes. 2 came against SC in their most recent game. Both really put the game on ice there at the very end. And those 5 pick sixes are tied with Tulane for the most in the FBS and the most in the season in Notre Dame history. Which says an awful lot about how opportunistic that defense is. Question number 5, can Indiana's run game continue to stay efficient? Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, they've each recorded 10 rushing touchdowns. They're one of 4 duos to each have 10-plus rushing touchdowns. Also included in that list, Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame. Now, Curtis Rourke, he really excels when they are sitting there in play action situations. He completes 80% of his passes off play action. They use it quite a bit. About a third of their dropbacks are off play action. So if they can keep the run game efficient with Ellison and Lawton, that'll open up the play action passing game. And that's where Rourke has done a really nice job all season long. Question 6, can Riley Leonards' arm win the game if necessary? Now, dating back to the Navy game on October 26th, Riley Leonard has 10 passing touchdowns against just 2 picks. All right. Before that game, it was 6-3 touchdown to interception ratio. So during this 5-game stretch, he's been a lot better. He looks a little bit more comfortable. He's also been a lot better throwing it downfield. On throws that travel 20-plus yards downfield in the last 5 games, he's 9 of 15. Well, in the first 7 games, he was just 5 of 18. So much more efficient when pushing it down the field. And Indiana has not been a team that has faced a lot of downfield throws this year. They've faced just 32 and have given up just 8 completions. That's the second fewest in the country. And then question number 7. Curtis Rourke, RPO. He's going to be facing a lot of man coverage. That's what Notre Dame does. They play a ton of man coverage. Can this RPO attack for Indiana force a lot of one-on-ones on the outside? Can they win those one-on-ones? Elijah Surratt has a ton of contested catches. He's going to have to be big, likely working against Christian Gray, who at times got exposed against USC. And then on the other side, will they be able to create matchups with a multitude of different wide receivers? Probably going to be Omar Cooper more than anybody else working against a true freshman Leonard Moore. So should be really interesting, the cat and mouse game that goes on in this game. It's a fascinating matchup, a trend in the game. Notre Dame and Indiana are both 9-3 against the spread this season, 3rd best in the FBS. Indiana covered the spread by an average of 2 touchdowns. That's the best. And Notre Dame covered by an average of 10.7 points. So these 2 teams have been great against the spread all season long. I will not make a pick in the game, but we hope that you tune in. This will be Friday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time on ABC.